Right. So that last sequence, bringing in Nora, was, as I said before, it's my bridging device to go from the objections to adaptations like reworkings of realism to now move on to dealing with new plays, contemporary plays that are working within realist conventions, and particularly to understand feminist uses of realism. And that involves crucially explaining why it was, if we started out with objections back in that initial wave of feminist theorizing, why there's been a shift in feminist perspectives on contemporary uses of realism. And that's why in the reading for today, I sent you the extract from Jill Dolan's more recent article by Jill Dolan from the 2008, where she's looking at the American playwright Wendy Wasserstein, whose work was Broadway-based, mainstream. And that was Jill's own reassessment of a playwright that she'd initially completely dismissed. And I think in that piece, or the extract from it that I've sent, you can see various comments in there that help you to understand why there was a kind of shift in perspectives and more reconciliations rather than objections to realism as we've had before. And part of that is changing where we looked at. Like previously, we were always looking to the cultural margins. Suddenly it felt more important to be thinking what's happening in terms of popular feminisms in the mainstream. Hence why one of the books I worked on with my feminist colleague Geraldine Harris was called A Good Night Out for the Girls. What's happening in terms of commercial circuits more? What feminism is in there? In particular, Jill Dolan mentions that by the period in which she's writing, this is towards the end of the first decade of the 21st century, 2008, it wasn't this moment, this historical moment to split hairs anymore about which feminisms do the most radical work, which forms in theatre do the most radical work, because by then, and this is as true as the UK as it is for North America that Jill Dolan's writing about, we had lost a lot from the feminist tradition of the kind that I was talking about yesterday. It's gone through a kind of low through the 90s and into that first decade. It's only in the second decade that in England that we get a reversal and back to a feminist high and an outcrop of feminist theatre making. So in this first decade, it is a time, as Jill points out, not to split hairs anymore. We needed to grapple with the fact that feminist theatre become far less visible, and that all forms and feminisms might be necessary to try and connect up and begin to make a difference again. Okay. I've said before, moving more concretely to the UK context, that realism is something that from a feminist perspective we have to keep thinking about because it is such a dominant tradition for us. And because it's a dominant tradition and considered a kind of old-fashioned, shall we say, tradition, it's never really attracted much critical interest or theoretical interest, whether it's from feminist quarters or not. So what you find when you want to think about contemporary realism is it often involves a turning back to Raymond Williams, who also, and I've put a quote for you there, recognised that even realism in its 19th century form was considered boring by anybody other than the kind of enamoured middle classes. But it was Williams, I'm moving on slightly, that actually did this brilliant, I still think brilliant, lecture on realism back in 1977, and when theorists and critics turn to understanding realism now, that's the piece that they go back to try and grapple more with what it is and how we can look at it, understand it. And the headlines from that are that what he does is to look historically to establish the three emphases that I've noted there that make up realism. And they are the secular, the contemporary, and the socially extended. So those are the three that he notes that historically constitute realism: the secular, the contemporary, and the socially extended. But by the time it comes into the 20th century context, he adds a fourth, and that's the consciously interpretive in relation to a particular political viewpoint. So to summarize those, the 4 points: the secular, meaning theatre is no longer kind of rooted in the sacred as it was formerly in some traditions. So it's very much in the secular world. It's contemporary insofar as it's dealing with actions in the present and present day conditions. The socially extended means it's looking beyond some of the kind of more narrow confines of class, beyond those restrictions. And I've added, that's my point rather than William's, I think socially extended in theatre also means thinking about your audience too. To what extent you're moving beyond middle class audiences. So for me, that's also an important point. And the notion, that fourth one that gets added for the 20th century, the particular political viewpoint, it means that we can, when we're looking at realism, identify, a feminist viewpoint, a socialist viewpoint, a socialist feminist viewpoint, through analysing the work, that actually we can identify that is the orientation in the play. So that's the one that comes in the 20th century and beyond. He also advocates that we don't think of it as a monolithic entity, realism, that we think of it as heterogeneous thinking in terms of realisms. There isn't necessarily one fixed form we should think of it as. So not a fixed category necessarily. And part of the reason it's not so fixed is because realisms change according to their historical context and those social conditions it's dealing with over time. So that is a way of saying that we must always think about dramatic form, whether it's realism or any other form, in relation to its context. It's not form alone that does the political work, it's form in relation to context. So that also means that, let's say, a form like realism, condemned as old-fashioned at one time, can also be reinvigorated in another, depending on the socio-political context that it reappears in. As I say, and it can be said of any other form of theatre according to the context and shifting context. And that's why, so we had the definition of the classic realism, the closed form. I just wanted to point out to you, to support William's point about the kind of heterogeneity of realisms, is just note how often, if you're looking at discussions of realism, there's a kind of adjective that goes with it. I gave you Ruby Cohen's Retreats from Realism in Recent English Drama there, and in Cohen's she talks about poetic realism, heightened, symbolic. They nuance it differently. Another one I thought about was back in the 90s, we had a wave of what at the time was called in-your-face theatre. It was like studio-based theatre that was contemporary, hard-hitting, full of vulgar language, mostly written by the boys and occasional women that got associated with the boys. And that was called dirty realism. Not realism pure, as some say, dirty realism. So that the point about mentioning the adjectival connections is, for us, it's like what happens when feminism is attached to realism, feminist realism. What do we think of it? And then one other point there, just to elicit from the Dolan reading, is what she does, I think, very importantly point out is that realism in different national contexts has different uses. And that's particularly important from our feminist perspective that we're thinking about. So realism might be out in one country, but it can be in a different political context in another. Absolutely important. And given how time has gone on, that one other point that she makes, we can also pick up in the discussions that we're having shortly, is moving beyond the feminist critique that we've talked about and went on for some years, if not decades. We're now at a point where it can expand the terms and criteria as the genre also becomes more fluid. So one of the things I'll be inviting us to consider are kind of the more fluid possibilities of the play Free Outgoing that we're looking at, that you've also had for this to read for this session. So here I start to move towards Anupama Chandrasekhar and the questions about what she's using in terms of realist conventions to make a feminist play. What are the more fluid uses and potential feminist political ends of realism that we might be able to uncover and agree on through my bit of commentary and our interactive discussion time. Before we get to the play, this bit is just to set up a little bit of information about Anupama and how she came to write Free Outgoing. And partly I wanted to do this because I find her career trajectory quite exceptional, unusual, because she's a playwright who lives in Chennai but has carved out her playwriting career in the UK. So she kind of moves back and forth between the two. And I've listed there, not all of, but kind of key works of hers, starting back in 2004, Acid at the Mumbai Festival, which dealt with acid attacks on Indian women. So that's the first kind of piece that really gets her career going, though that wasn't performed in the UK. And then she really makes the breakthrough with Free Outgoing, which appeared at the Royal Court first in 2007, where it was in the studio space, and by 2008 transferred to their main downstairs theatre and on to the Edinburgh Festival, which is the major international festival. And the Royal Court, I mentioned yesterday, is England's premier venue for new playwriting. It doesn't brand itself as a left-wing theatre, but that's what it's known for. It tracks all the playwrights on the left, or the majority will be on the left. Okay, and it also has a strong tradition of realism, but is always kind of trying to find the kind of new experimental playwrights too. From Free Outgoings, then for the Royal Court, she did Disconnect, which is about Indian call centres. Then, and I think I forgot to put the date on when the Crows visit. I'd have to check it again, but I know that's one's more recent. But you can see a kind of Ibsen connection there because it was inspired by Ibsen's play The Ghosts. And that one was a piece dealing with male violence against women. More recently still, The Father and the Assassin, which was done at the London's National Theatre in 2022, dealing with Gandhi's assassin. And at the same time as appearing at the National, she's become the first international playwright to be in residence at London's Premier Theatre. So that's an exceptional achievement, is what I'm kind of trying to point out here. She has a close relationship with the director Indu Rubessingham, and Indu is about to become the new director of the National Theatre. So that's quite two astonishing women. Okay? So to explain to you why it is Indian writer for Chennai comes to have this high-profile career as a successful playwright in the UK, then I have to kind of just do this explanatory backstory for you about the way in which she came through the Royal Court's international department. So the international department was founded by Elise Dodgson in 1996 at the theatre, and has remained a robust wing of their activities ever since. And what it does through that programme is it has residential summer schools in the UK from writers from many countries that can kind of apply to be part of it, and that's to kind of nurture, mentor the work. And then what it does in the other way is the Royal Court will go out with the support of the British Council often to other countries and host kind of long workshop periods there. And their workshops are playwrights. They started off doing directors and playwrights and now just specialise in playwrights. So they're kind of nurturing playwrights in different parts of the world. And it was having a connection with the Mumbai-based Rage Theatre, who run the Writers' Block residential scheme in partnership with the court and the British Council, that Anupama comes through this route. And having had a piece in the Writers' Block Festival, she's one of the writers then that was selected by the court to work on a further play, and that's when she wrote Free Outgoing. Okay, so that's how it all started. There are some accusations that a scheme like that could be seen, and with some justification, I think, as very colonialist, that it's like encouraging playwrights from different parts of the world to conform to British traditions, and given that realism isn't there, you know, it's like, does that scheme simply generate writers who are just going to emulate, you know, and then be colonized into that kind of way of making? I have to say that there is some, I think there is some kind of a troubling element of that, and I think there are some examples of where it starts the work the other way, where instead of the writers always being under the auspices of the court, those writers are then able to work back again and bring something of their traditions over into the UK. That's where it gets more interesting. So it's not problem-free. On the other hand, I have to say, having kind of, for the book on the Royal Court International, interviewed a number of playwrights from different parts of the world, the playwrights were kind of almost 100% behind it. Not least because in countries, their own countries, where they can't get the support to become playwrights, there isn't the infrastructure. So they welcome the expertise that these schemes are able to offer. So I've raised that issue of colonialisation perhaps, but I'm suggesting that the more interesting question to ask of Free Outgoing as a play developed through this International Writers Programme is whether it renews attachments to realism in successful feminist politicising ways. So here's a little bit about the play, and then we can move into discussion. So Free Outgoing, the image is taken from the Royal Court production, was a play that was inspired, and these are Anupama's quotations, and I've put on the last slide, you'll see where all the quotations come from. I've given you the source, so it is there if you want to check this interview out, which they all come from. So she explains how it was inspired by an incident in Delhi in which two school kids filmed themselves having sex. The video clip got transmitted from cell phone to cell phone and passed all around the country. She draws on conventions of realism. We're back to an individual having a struggle with oppressive values and systems of contemporary society. I feel that the figure of the mother, Malini, can be seen, as another Ibsenite, as a woman in crisis. And Anupama generally does acknowledge the Ibsen influences on her work. I mean, as you can see from the inspiration of ghosts, but she would generally kind of agree with that as an influence. She also explains there how she first conceived the main protagonist as Sharon, the brother of the young girl who's been filmed, and focused on his friendship with his schoolmate Jeevan, who is the boy his sister had taken up with. But the story I wanted to tell was not coming through. The protagonist wasn't right for the story. And one of the first questions Dominic Cook, the director, asked was, who has the most to lose and who has the most to gain in your play? So she thought about this and had to admit that was probably not the brother, but the mother, Malini. The point of view of a woman, rather than that of a confused teenage boy, needed to be central, so that's what reframed the drafting of the play. So it's the mother, she decided, who had the most to lose. In the process of redrafting, she also changed her original ideas from having multiple settings and reduced that to just one setting. So that did fall in line with the convention of classic realism, which dictates that you have this kind of one room and that all the characters are trapped and confined within that room, and all the action is in this, what Anu Palmer calls the pressure cooker environment. I've also given you there the reference to Berto States that I think talks eloquently about realism's room as this spatial fatality. Whatever the characters might say about their desires to be elsewhere, the setting says it will all end here. Something also to keep in mind for the forthcoming discussion. In this case of the room, I'd also though point out we have got another character in the sense of the global entering the room, all those influences, Western influences that penetrate the solid fourth wall defense of domestic realism, which he's plugged into this technological, free, outgoing world. And as a reminder of that, remember the frenzied moment in which the Mother Malini goes about removing all those mobile phones and the game console and the cable channel box, and then takes the kitchen knife to the TV in order to cut her family off from Western influences, international channels of communication. And that's the moment just before she also, we're told, cuts off her daughter's hair. It's quite a violent moment in there. In terms of reworking realism, then we have India's most watched teenager, the girl whose image has gone viral on the internet, remain an unseen character in the play, this absent present victim of cyberbullying and of the local double standard governing sexual behaviour. So this immediately negates the convention by which a major character usually functions as our entry into the world that the realist play is portraying. Okay, it really goes against the grain. But I think this relates to the withholding of realism's objectifying gaze on the objectified feminine. It marks the impossibility of the young woman's entry into the world of the narrative as a subject. So as she's cast out of the regime of visual representation, India's most watched teenager, she's called in the play, remains unseen, a haunting reminder of the sexual inequality that conditions women's claims to citizenship. So that, I feel, is absolutely a key reworking of realism, or what Jill Dolan would call more fluid uses of realism. Just some kind of few final comments about the play, notably the absence of female solidarity. It's not there in the play, and nor is it, I can't always say nor is it Nora in Nora, nor is it Nora, as you pointed out earlier. And because that Deepa is locked away in her room, then the domestic space is one in which it brings the values, the conservative values of a Tamil community under realism's critical scrutiny. I think we can readily see how, as a widow, Malini has no patriarchal protection from the shame that her daughter has brought on the home through her free outgoing behaviour. So there's no support within the family, there's no support beyond the family, from her community or from the school. And the absence of female solidarity is absolutely marked when we hear with that refrain of the women with their broomsticks, the women from the slums, women in starched saris, all united against her. So there's nothing there. And besieged by the media, ironically, the only recourse that's suggested in the closure of the play is actually to turn to the media to find a way out. So again, I think there you've got another kind of echo of that double fracture or that double vision inside and outside of systems of representation. You can't exist outside of it. Either you're in it, but outside, it's not allowed. This slide was just to give you some reflections from as I said, it was done in the UK, not in Chennai. And the right-wing press had a field day because they read against the feminist perspective in the play. So there I've picked out a couple of the right-wing reviewers for you. The first one was from the tabloid Daily Mail, Quentin Letts, asking, what's any of this got to do with 21st century Britain? And in response, firing off a volley of anti-feminist sentiments, finding something admirable about a culture that pleases young women's sexuality. Okay, so totally against the grain of the play. And then over in the right-wing Daily Telegraph, Charles Spencer found a lot that he really liked about free outgoing, particularly as an antidote to the way in which the concepts of shame and disgrace appear to be alien in British society. Consider the case of unmarried teenage pregnancy, he went on. In my youth, it was still regarded as an indelible stigma. These days, it's viewed as the most sensible way of getting to the top of the council housing list. Okay, so this was, I mean, I have to say that if the more sensible critics out there and those that are not so far on the right really warmed to the play, and they did get its kind of feminist resonances. But I wanted to show you how it was possible also for it to be read in the opposite way. And I will come back more to the whole system of criticism reviewing tomorrow when we move on to radical feminism. And in terms of production history, so I mentioned that it kind of kept going up in scale, and it has been revived internationally, many different countries. The one example I pulled out there for you was the one back in 2014 when it was done by Nightwood in Canada, and Nightwood is the longest running women's theatre company in that country. And again, they'd had you can see it there, they'd had 2 cyber related fatalities there, and that's why the company there picked up on it. This case of the 2 schoolgirls who were raped by teen boys got films, video goes viral, and the girls commit suicide. So by Nightwood doing this play, then it really was in the context of a tragic, or double tragedy. And they also importantly created an educational pack aimed at teenagers. So it wasn't that related to the whole kind of social media and cyberbullying. So it wasn't just the play itself that's trying to reflect on it, but again, kind of extending what the play's doing by going out into the educational arena too, which again has a history of feminist practice doing that. Not just feminist practice, but it's there in that tradition. So to sum up Chandrasekhar's feminist uses of realism, we're back to an individual woman's struggle with the democratic so-called face of the Indian nation. The release of feminist energies through realism's room of spatial confinement. And I have to say, in the staging of the performance, particularly if you kind of saw it in more of the studio spaces, you did get that kind of claustrophobic, how on earth do you get out of here? So there is a kind of real energetic vibe to it when it's staged. And then, crucially, resistance to an appropriative phallocentric gaze because of contravening realism's major convention, of having your major protagonist on stage. And here, India's most watched is the most unwatched teenager. Okay, so here are the prompts for the discussion. And again, always from our feminist perspectives. So I have invited you now to think about any key moments or concerns in the play that resonate for you. You might want to think about whether there's room for social realism in an Indian context and reflect on that, for better or worse. Whether, as an Indian playwright, Anupama writing in English, is there an issue there in terms of social inclusivity? And I say that because I'm not sure whether the play's actually managed to make it here or not. The last I heard, it hadn't. Partly because the subject was tricky, but also because the infrastructural problems of getting it staged here. And that encountered some difficulties, I know, initially. But then the whole kind of tradition, and you'll know far more than I do about this, about, if you're writing in English and the work were to be performed here, does that then make it exclusive, given that it's working through the English language with just these occasional shifts? And related to that, in terms of limitations and possibilities of following in the Ibsenite individual woman in crisis tradition. And then finally, whether you consider this story impactful as per the Sphinx test that we were looking at yesterday. And of course, you can pick up any other things, but please relate it to the play in hand. Okay, so, and we're going to try, I think this has been pointed out, but we're going to try, just for those of you tuning in online, in terms of the feedback at the end to close this session, we're going to try and weave some of your comments in with feedback in the room and not sort of leave them till right to the end. So we're going to see if we can manage that, so we can hear from online and in the room and try and mix us up a bit. Okay, right, off we go.
You want them in groups? Yes. You could do the group thing again. Yeah.
They can change groups.
Yeah. They can walk around. Yeah. The young people came with some forms for you to sign. Just sign 3 spaces. So I have to just sign here. I just announce about the workshop again because only 3 people have signed up so far.
We don't have to do it if they don't want to.
Yeah. Should we just one more round we can announce and that's it. If it's too small a number, I don't think we
Yeah,
should
if
go.
it's too small, then we won't do it. But,
Should I remind them? Or one more time, I'll just remind them.
yeah, but if they don't really want to do
Then
it,
yeah. Okay. What do you want to do? She's saying if there's not too much interest, then we can let it be.
Yeah.
Then she can just
Then we can just say that for those three who signed up, we can just add.
Check what their names are. People who have signed up. I just come over with early and then come For your sake. Yes, Vedic has sent us the Google Meet link. Rooney is planning to stay with us. Transfer the money to mine. She was interested in attending the final session. She said she might come. But she's also interested. Yes, two people. Yeah. So we said maybe Kavita can tell them they can come and informally chat with you. Tea or something. Yeah.
Right, I'll do the. Why don't we get? I was just going to say we're going to put that together. We've got some online
Yes,
through
a
that's
lot.
something useful.
One is about this whole idea of who is it for and the audience and so on. And then this absent present of presence of the victim, how it's an interesting choice. So somebody is also saying that for him it was a way of denying the audience the role of being there. Like you're not seeing the victim.
All right, you read one out to start with because I'm going a bit. Yeah.
Yeah,
Trying to say,
okay.
yeah. Come up with me. But we'll try and get one in. Maybe pick out a couple. Pick out a couple. Do you want to do it like that?
Sure.
No. Okay, we're go. Right, some interesting thoughts coming out. So we're going to try and do some bits of feedback now, but we're going to try first of all to bring in a couple of comments that have come in from our online participants. See if we can start it that way. Do you want to?
uh, I'm not going to take sort of mention the names every time, but there are three key points that have come in this discussion. One is this lack of possibility of any kind of solidarity among women, and another group was also discussing that. Then also about that, who is it for, in terms of funding, and for whom it has been presented. So it has never come to India. So uh, what could have happened if, because the characters of the play are from the Indian context, but it's never been presented here. And the third key point is this whole idea about absence of victim. So this absent presence, and someone online has sort of remarked that, um, I'm just going to read that out, that how uh, it denies the audience the role of being a voyeur, that you are not looking at the victim because you are just not, but you are only listening about her, you're only hearing about her. So these, like solidarity, absent, present, and uh, mm, and this relationship between international funding and playwrights, and when it comes to, and what happens in terms of language like Tamil and English. So those are some of the key points that have come up in this. And in this particular comment about absent present is that the aspect of not bringing Deepa on the stage, whether it is a symbolic representation of how the girl never gets to decide or even exert her agency during these situations, and it is always the people outside who gets to decide for her that what is going to be her fate, and you never hear her voice. So how does that play out, and this choice by the playwright and the director not to bring her on stage? So these are three key points that have come up.
I mean, just to add to that, because we were just talking about this over over this little cluster here, weren't we, by the pillar? And I did end up saying that for me, that decision not to have Deepa on stage, which was the one decision Anupama knew right from the start that she wouldn't be on stage, for me is crucial in terms of when I think about this play from feminist perspectives. Because if they brought her on stage, then it would, as we were just talking about there, it would mean having to go through all that, to be, shamed again, objectified again. And of course that comes up in the way that the play that's written, but it means that you haven't got that kind of in your face shaming of the woman and objectification in that way. So I think for me that is a kind of like a clear example of this more fluid reworking of realism that works to the advantage of giving the play a feminist critical edge, I'd say. Excuse me. Could we, to complement that, can we bring in the comments that I heard around here about caste? Because I thought this was really interesting, because it also relates to what's come up in the comment about what resonates or what might be missing for if it were to be done in an Indian context. Who did you decide is going to take the mic? I did warn them.
Yeah. So the first thought that was kind of coming is that what is the caste location of this play? Because we felt that there was an entire kind of regime of caste which functions in India when it comes to love, policing, and the entire idea of pollution that the play works with. And it was kind of missing completely from the dynamic. And as Amrita was also telling, the surname Haridas is really a kind of a neutral surname, and surname is what caste works through. So yeah, that was our thought, and one of the things we were coming up with is that it's based for a UK audience. But then you also reminded us that Anupama writes her plays with an Indian audience in mind, yes. Which is to say that this is a particular kind of feminist play, a particular strand of feminism, which works out particular bodies without caste. So that is an interesting exercise maybe for us to, think about.
Yes, that was a brilliant observation for me to hear in particular, because I wouldn't have picked that up as somebody who received the play in the UK without that kind of depth of local knowledge. And also what you said about the name as well, that the surname is a marker of caste, and that the naming used in the play is kind of fairly neutral, so it doesn't give you a clue either, which is really interesting. Anything else to bring in? Other things that have come up? I can't remember all of them now. Is it about the play?
No.
Okay. Can we stick, if you don't mind, if we could stick with the play? Sorry. I do want to keep with the play. Yeah?
I thought that the central conflict, or the center stage conflict, if she'd chosen to keep Deepa out of this sort of stage, the central conflict sort of comes around the fact that the mother is obsessed with Deepa being a good girl and having done this, but not enough around, say, the fact that this was circulated. I think it would have been a more sort of fluid, realistic, if someone could have sort of kept coming in, that how did this circulate, because that is the invasion of privacy, not the fact that she has had sex, but the fact that that intimate moment without her consent has been circulated somehow.
So in part you sort of start imagining there could have been another play here, in effect.
Yeah.
Like dealing with that whole kind of issue about the lack of consent when that image is taken and then goes viral. Like, you could see the play moving in a different direction. Is that what you mean?
I thought that even if she had kept the mother in the center and sort of had a mother who's sort of been let down and is worried about the future of her children, and to some extent she does get vilified for being that overambitious, but to not have this sort of recurring reminder as well, that what about the circulation? Because I remember I was in college when this had happened in real sort of, and I remember the media did cover, because MMS was a new thing then, and this is how it entered into public vocabulary through this scandal. And like she pointed out, that one of the reasons that she probably chose not to show the woman was because a lot of movies were made which were like soft porn, which had sort of MMS scandals around it. So it is a choice, but I felt that somehow not flagging the circulation as a, maybe not center stage, but as a repeated reminder, I thought was something I could have made it more real.
Okay, so all right, sorry for the initial misunderstanding. So you just felt that the nudges she gives towards, like when Ramesh is caught with it looking on his phone, or the mother that finally understands what's happened, that there should be more of that it should be strengthened. That's what you're saying.
Because I felt that what it did was that it sort of took the dialogue backwards, in the sense having sex became an issue, although it was a consensual act of sex, rather than making the issue around sort of this public, this sort of announcement of the fact that two people have shared an intimate act. And even if I understand that she's writing in 2007, but the fact that even then she's in 2003, I was a college student and remember thinking that why is no one questioning that boy, how could he share it? And she's writing in 2007. Somehow that fact that there are no interjections also being made repeatedly, maybe more than once around this, I found it a bit sort of more towards right-wing politics than, because like you showed in the reviews, they did talk about sex, but the play is not about sex. It is a consensual act of sex. It's about circulation of someone. So I thought that for me the play there,
that's where it fell down for you. Yeah. Interesting. No, that's really interesting. That's really interesting. Something similar was kind of being said over there as well. Kind of that's resonant. Thank you. Interesting critique. I'll remember that one.
I'll give.
No, I just when one is saying that like she keeps the Indian audience in mind, and then there is this question and comment about caste. I also I felt that she's drawing in her text from a real incident, but it's also about that she's placing it into a certain class category. So it's not just the caste. And while she has kept the name Haridas, which is not a surname, but Haridas very often is also identified as a Dalit name in many of the mythological texts and Vedas and all of that. So what I'm saying is that caste, while the caste question she is not addressing at all, but her keeping the story from a middle class, upper middle class kind of that family is also that the question of class also, it's there, yet it's not there. So what happens to stories which are coming from the class margins? So I don't know about other works of Anupama, but I'm just responding to what I found.
Yeah, which hence the question I put up there about where you bump up against the limitations. You've got the possibilities, but you've also got the limitations. And I think that's where also the kind of those Ibsen influences, which she very much acknowledges, keep pushing her into that class range, and that's where some of those, I think, the work can get limited. And of the other work I've seen, I would say it's still operating in a similar class milieu.
Yeah, I'll give.
And it's just kind of a clarification also, and trying to think through with the discussion that is happening. It's the metaphor of the water in the play, that quenching thirst, not getting enough water, the water lorry not being let in, or that they have to go and pick up the water from the water lorry. So there is a recurring theme of thirst and a bodily function, that one needs water to survive. And then there is, of course, the entire question of having sex, and another way of engaging with the body, and how, or rather abstaining from sex, that she shouldn't have done it, a good girl, the mother's incredulity that how it's not her, and the way she keeps going about it. So is there a way, I'm just trying to wrap my head around, I'm not very sure where this is going, but also how to think about this water metaphor with the question of shaming body, the caste question, where water is a very important aspect of recognizing a caste and not recognizing a caste. So there are several things which are part of the fluidity of, if we are trying to think about the way the form functions and the dialogues are presented. But I don't know where, this is just kind of free-flowing thought that I had while reading the play.
No, I know that in terms of the water, that's something she would cite as coming directly from lived experience. I can't remember, she was referring to one particular drought where all the lorries would have to come around. You probably, of course, be aware of this. So that is that's something that she would draw on as very specific to her experience. In terms of trying to connect it to I don't know. For me, I'd say the water operates as a kind of metaphor for this thirst for the free outgoing freedom that the daughter is denied. I mean, that's how in my head I've kind of resolved it. But it may be too oversimplistic because of me not being able to get the nuances that you can, for example, around the caste issues, which I just, seeing it in the UK with the limited access I have to the knowledge of India, I just can't get. But for me, it comes back to the thirst to be free outgoing and to be lifted from these constraints, to not have your home under under siege, to not have be in a colony where everybody turns against you, and all of those things. So that's how I've always read it. But I know for sure that some of her anchors as a writer are those that she's directly experienced, and that's different to kind of picking up on the media story, the media's version of this whole incident, the real life one, as reported by the media, because that is something she's picking up from the media as opposed to something that she's feeding out of her lived experience. So probably some of it is a kind of, in the fusion of those things, creates some resonances there that don't necessarily entirely weave together.
No, it was just interesting, like just tying up some of the discussions also about like what travels, like, so I was thinking that, you were saying about how the direct kind of incidents of cyberbullying leading to women's deaths or rape, I was wondering whether it's that element, like the fact that she picks on this particular incident of digitally mediated violence that also allows it to have this kind of global resonance, because that's it's a play in 2007, but I was just thinking of so many crime series, for example, that have come out in the last 10 years, where the same anxiety around young women's bodies and a particular kind of way that leaks, right, and the anxiety that produces, which is very visceral, right? Like, so does that then cut across different global contexts? Is a question one could think about. Yeah. Thanks. Yeah.
No, and just very, very quickly, because I know we have to wrap up, but absolutely, I mean, that is an issue that will travel, and I know in the room this afternoon we've got several examples that have come up about cyberbullying, and it's an issue, all these years on from that play, that absolutely hasn't gone away. And yes, it travels, and it's just a disappointing recognition, isn't it, to acknowledge that is the case, and it's impossible to police, and it just gives another dimension to the violence against women, which we're going to come up against when we look at radical feminism tomorrow. It's yet another dimension. And I know some of you have mentioned about, like, one of the things is, well, you withdraw from the cyberspace, but that's actually then withdrawing your right to be out there, and to be out there without being subjected to violent attacks by having your images violated, faked, or whatever else I've been hearing about this afternoon. Okay, so a quick reminder for tomorrow is we are doing Sarah Daniels' masterpieces, which was sent in advance, so please, if you haven't read it, read it before the session, and we'll be picking up again on some of these matters. Yeah?
I was thinking about the title, Free Outgoing. Actually, it's 2007, and in India, I don't think data was free at that time. It was really costly. And at that time, this cyber crime took place. Whereas on one hand, there is a contrast. On one hand, the female figures are really not free. Like the mother, she is in ostracization, and the Deepa is not really free. They are not really free. But I think Anupama Chandrasekhar, she had a vision that how free data can hamper that freedom. Even it's the free data, but it's hampering the freedom. Yeah.
Free data that's hampering the freedom.
Yeah.
Freedom
For tomorrow.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot, everyone. Yeah. Thank you. We'll see you all at 3 tomorrow. Yeah. Thanks, Aileen. Thanks a lot. Yeah. Thanks, everyone. Yeah.